Welcome, dear traveller, to Medieval Screen Finds, a quiet corner of the internet where we explore history, a chill space where the echoes of the past gently guide you toward a restful calm. Tonight, as the world outside settles into its gentle slumber, we journey back in time, far from the bright lights and hurried pace of our modern lives. We will explore a history often left untold, a subtle undercurrent that flowed beneath the cobblestone streets and within the timbered houses of medieval European towns. This is a story of shadows, of hidden pathways, and of the clandestine lives that stirred when the sun dipped below the horizon. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Medieval Screen Finds to get more boring sleep videos, but only if these videos truly brings you rest. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's comforting seeing all the places where these calm historical stories reach. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate descent of evening upon a medieval European town. The vibrant clamour of the marketplace, filled with the shouts of vendors and the murmur of bartering, would gradually subside. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer would quiet. The scent of baking bread, once rich and pervasive, would diminish, replaced by the subtle, earthy aroma of wood smoke drifting from countless chimneys. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fleeting hues of orange and purple, a profound transformation would begin to take place. This was a world utterly devoid of the widespread artificial illumination we take for granted today, making medieval nights truly dark. Consider the modern city at night, ablaze with electric lights, dispelling shadows, stretching the day's activities well into the late hours. Now picture the stark contrast. Beyond the flickering, limited glow of a few central street lamps, perhaps a single tallow candle in a merchant's window, or the occasional lantern carried by a watchman, the vast majority of the town would plunge into an almost absolute impenetrable gloom. The narrow, winding alleys, the spaces between closely packed timber-framed houses, the unpaved paths leading to the town gates, all would be swallowed by a velvet blackness. The faint light of the moon, if it was present and not obscured by clouds, would cast long dancing shadows that could easily be mistaken for movement, playing tricks on the eyes. This was a darkness that invited uncertainty, a profound absence of light that transformed the familiar into the mysterious, shrouding every corner in potential. The very air would seem to grow heavier, cooler, carrying with it a tangible sense of hidden depths. It was this pervasive, enveloping obscurity that provided the literal cover of darkness for activities that shunned the light of day, creating a distinct nocturnal world where different rules seemed to apply. As this profound darkness settled, the familiar sounds of daytime life would recede, replaced by a wholly different, often unsettling, symphony of the night. Imagine the pervasive silence, broken by subtle magnified sounds. The distant rustling of leaves in the wind, a sound that during the day might pass unnoticed, would now seem amplified, perhaps even ominous. The quiet skittering of unseen creatures, a rat darting across a cobblestone street, a mouse scurrying within a timbered wall, would become distinct and sometimes alarming. Occasionally, a distant cry might pierce the quiet, perhaps a lost traveller, a drunkard from a tavern, or something more sinister. Its origin and meaning left to the imagination. The mournful hoot of an owl from the nearby forest, or the sharp bark of a dog in a distant yard, would carry far in the stillness. The wind, no longer competing with the cacophony of the market, would whisper through the eaves of houses, sighing down narrow lanes, carrying with it the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and perhaps the subtle smell of unwashed bodies or refuse from the street. These sounds and smells, magnified by the lack of visual cues, stimulated the other senses, painting a vivid, if sometimes disquieting picture of the nocturnal world. They created an atmosphere of heightened awareness, where every creak and whisper could signify a presence, real or imagined. This sensory experience of the medieval night was a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the day, a constant reminder that the familiar world had withdrawn, leaving the streets to a different kind of life, one that moved with stealth and secrecy, relying on senses other than sight. Within this deep shroud of night, the already limited authority of medieval governance became even more tenuous. Imagine a town without a centralized police force, without patrol cars or streetlights. Law enforcement was rudimentary at best, relying heavily on communal responsibility and fragmented authority. While towns might employ watchmen, these individuals were few in number, and their patrols often infrequent and predictable. Picture a solitary figure, perhaps an elderly man, making his rounds through a designated quarter, equipped with little more than a dim lantern and a simple staff, his voice calling out the hour and the assurance that all's well. His presence was more symbolic than truly deterrent. Many streets and alleys, particularly those on the periphery of the town or within its poorer, more labyrinthine districts, were largely unpoliced. The watchmen focused on the main thoroughfares, the market squares, and the gates, leaving vast swathes of the urban landscape to their own devices. Crime, if it occurred in these unlit, unwatched spaces, often went unpunished or even undiscovered until the return of daylight. There was no rapid response, no systematic investigation. Any pursuit would rely on a passerby raising an alarm, or a victim's own desperate cries for help. This lack of pervasive oversight created vast pockets of opportunity for those inclined towards illicit activities. The darkness became their accomplice, cloaking their movements and providing ample time for their schemes to unfold without fear of immediate detection. The silence of the unpoliced streets was not always peaceful. It was often the quiet breath of unchallenged transgression, a testament to the fact that beyond the very few illuminated squares, the town effectively governed itself, or failed to, in the profound obscurity of the night. This profound darkness and the accompanying sense of unpoliced space inevitably fed into the prevailing fear and superstition that permeated medieval society. Imagine the medieval mind, grappling with a world not yet illuminated by scientific understanding, where unseen forces, spirits, and divine intervention were accepted realities. After sundown, these anxieties intensified. The shadows themselves seemed to harbour malevolent entities, whispered folklore of ghosts, demons, and mischievous sprites coming alive in the gloom. The creak of a distant door, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, all could be interpreted as portents, as signs of supernatural presence. But beyond these fantastical fears, there were very real, very human dangers that intensified after sundown. The absence of light made one vulnerable to ambush, to robbery, to violent assault. The anonymity provided by the darkness could embolden those with ill intent, allowing them to move unseen, to strike swiftly, and to vanish without a trace. Imagine the nervous quickening of pace, the tightening grip on a staff or a purse, as one navigated a familiar street that felt suddenly alien and threatening in the profound obscurity. Windows would be shuttered tightly, doors barred, not just against the chill, but against the unseen dangers lurking outside. This pervasive sense of unease, this heightened vulnerability to both the imagined and very real threats, underscored the transformation of the medieval town from a place of communal activity to a realm where caution and suspicion became paramount. The night was not just a time for rest, it was a time of heightened vigilance, a period when the very air seemed thick with apprehension, a quiet dread that settled upon the hearts of those who ventured out or lay awake listening. As the sun truly set and the stars, if visible, began to prick holes in the vast dark canvas above, the medieval town, for the most part, went to sleep. This fundamental cessation of most legitimate activity was a critical element in the landscape of medieval crime. The markets were packed away, the shops were shuttered, and the workshops fell silent. Most ordinary citizens, reliant on daylight for their work and without artificial light for evening leisure, would retire to their homes, seeking the warmth of their hearths and the comfort of their beds. This meant that the streets and public spaces, once bustling with daily commerce and social interaction, became largely deserted. This emptying out of the legitimate world left the thoroughfares and hidden passages to those with other intentions. The city sleeps, mostly, but for a different segment of the population, the night was not for rest, but for purpose. This quiet emptying of the urban landscape provided a crucial advantage for those involved in illicit activities. With fewer witnesses, less chance of accidental encounters, and the cloak of deep darkness, the risk of detection plummeted. The sound of their footsteps on cobblestones would echo in the profound silence, every shadow a potential hiding place. It was during these hours that the criminal underworld, however nascent and uncoordinated, could truly come alive, operating without the constant scrutiny of daytime. The vast, quiet expanse of the sleeping town became their domain, a stage for their clandestine movements and their shadowed endeavors, a silent, pervasive presence lurking beneath the veneer of slumbering peace. As the medieval town grew, evolving from simple agrarian settlements into complex hubs of commerce, trade, and population, so too did the intricate social fabric within their walls. This growth, however, while signifying prosperity and progress in one sense, also inadvertently sowed the seeds for the emergence of a criminal underworld. One of the most significant factors was the sheer phenomenon of urban growth and anonymity. Imagine a bustling city, its population swelling as people migrated from the countryside in search of opportunity, or simply to escape the rigid social structures of the feudal manor. Unlike the close-knit, highly visible communities of a rural village, where every individual was known, every action observed, and social pressure acted as a powerful deterrent to deviation, the burgeoning towns offered something entirely new: a degree of anonymity. In the winding labyrinth of new streets and burgeoning districts, it became possible for individuals to disappear from the watchful eye of familiar neighbors and local authorities. A person could arrive in a town, unburdened by a known past, and establish a new, less scrutinized existence. This anonymity provided fertile ground for those who wished to operate outside conventional norms, offering places where individuals could hide or operate away from close community scrutiny. A person with a dubious past, a desire to avoid taxation, or an inclination towards illicit activities could blend into the throng, their movements and associations less likely to be questioned. This newfound ability to exist beyond the immediate, pervasive gaze of a communal village allowed for the formation of looser, less accountable networks. The sheer volume of people, the constant flow in and out of the city gates, meant that unfamiliar faces were common, reducing the effectiveness of informal social controls. This urban anonymity was a quiet, almost imperceptible catalyst, gradually enabling the formation of associations built on shared illicit interests rather than traditional social bonds. The constant hum of the growing city, though signifying progress, also masked the subtle emergence of a different kind of order, one operating beneath the surface, protected by the sheer volume of humanity. Flowing beneath the surface of urban vitality was a constant, underlying current of hardship. Poverty and desperation were pervasive realities for a significant portion of the medieval urban population, providing a powerful impetus for some to turn to illicit means of survival. Imagine, individuals arriving in town from the countryside, perhaps driven by crop failures, or fleeing the strictures of serfdom, hoping for a better life. Many would find only tenuous employment, if any at all, existing on the very precipice of destitution. Consider the plight of the landless, those without inherited plots, forced to rely solely on meagre wages or casual labor. Their existence was precarious, a constant struggle against hunger and exposure. Then there were the dispossessed individuals who had lost their homes, their livelihoods, or their social standing due to various misfortunes, perhaps a fire, a debilitating illness, or a ruinous debt. And finally, those who failed in trades, unable to secure a successful apprenticeship or establish a viable workshop, relegated to the margins of the guild system. For these individuals, honest work might be scarce, poorly paid, or simply insufficient to feed a family. When faced with the stark choice between starvation and illicit activity, the path of crime, even petty crime, could appear as the only viable option. The gnawing ache of hunger, the biting cold of an unsheltered night, the desperate pleas of hungry children. These were powerful motivators, pushing individuals beyond the boundaries of legality. These were not necessarily individuals inherently predisposed to criminality, but rather those driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond their control. This widespread economic vulnerability created a ready pool of potential recruits for illicit ventures, individuals willing to take risks for the simple promise of sustenance. The quiet murmurs of desperation, the shuffling feet of the hungry, were an ever-present backdrop to the bustling market squares, a constant reminder of the fragile balance upon which medieval urban life rested. Adding to this complex urban mix was the continuous influx of transient populations. Imagine the steady stream of humanity flowing through the town gates. Travelers on long journeys, beggars seeking alms in more prosperous centers, pilgrims making their way to holy shrines, and perhaps most significantly, ex-soldiers and mercenaries returning from distant wars or discharged from service, often without pay or prospects. These individuals were, by their very nature, often outside established social norms. They had no fixed residence, no ties to local guilds or parishes, and no immediate family to vouch for their character. Their presence introduced an element of unpredictability and fluidity into the rigid social order of the medieval town. A pilgrim might be genuinely devout, but also desperate for coin, perhaps resorting to petty theft. An ex-soldier, accustomed to violence and the harsh realities of warfare, might find it difficult to reintegrate into peaceful society, their skills of combat now without legitimate employment, making them prone to robbery or coercion. Beggars, while often genuinely destitute, might form organized groups to control begging territories or engage in illicit trades on the side. This floating pool of humanity, often disconnected from the traditional social structures that enforced order, provided a fertile ground for the formation of informal, often criminal associations. They were a population without fixed roots, without the binding ties of community, rendering them less susceptible to the pressures of local reputation and more open to forming alliances based on shared risk and mutual benefit. The constant coming and going, the faces seen once and never again, contributed to the anonymity of the growing urban centers, allowing illicit networks to form and dissolve with an unsettling fluidity, making it difficult for authorities to track or contain them. Crucially, the medieval world operated with a profoundly rudimentary nature of law enforcement. Imagine a town without a police station, without uniformed officers patrolling the streets systematically. Law and order, such as it was, relied heavily on local communal responsibility rather than a dedicated professional police force. In many towns, the primary form of law enforcement was the hue and cry, where a victim of crime would raise an alarm, and all able-bodied citizens were expected to join in the pursuit of the offender. While effective in small, close-knit communities during daylight, This system faltered dramatically in the anonymity and darkness of a larger town. Beyond this communal response, there might be a few designated watchmen, as previously discussed, or town constables, often part-time positions filled by citizens on a rotating basis, lacking formal training or widespread authority. Their power was limited, their numbers insufficient to cover the sprawling urban landscape. There were no central databases, no fingerprinting, no forensic science. Investigating a crime relied almost entirely on witness testimony, confessions extracted under duress, or simple luck. This systemic lack of professional policing meant that criminal acts, particularly those committed under the cover of night or by transient individuals, had a high chance of going unpunished. The absence of a strong, visible, and ubiquitous law enforcement presence created a vacuum, an opportunity that was swiftly filled by those willing to operate outside the established legal framework. The quiet footsteps of the night watchman, often alone in the vast darkness, were a testament to the thin veneer of order, a stark reminder of how easily the shadows could conceal transgression from the eyes of authority. Within this landscape of urban anonymity, widespread poverty, transient populations, and limited policing, the very human need for survival and mutual support could paradoxically lead to the formation of criminal networks. Imagine individuals, disparate in their origins but united by their desperation, finding themselves adrift in a bustling yet indifferent city. The fundamental need for food, shelter, and mutual protection could draw these desperate individuals together into loose associations. A group of homeless beggars might band together, not only to share what meager alms they collected, but also to protect their begging territory from rivals, or to engage in petty theft together. An ex-soldier might form an alliance with a few hungry vagrants, pooling their limited resources and using their combined strength for more organized acts of robbery. These were not typically the highly structured hierarchical syndicates we associate with modern organized crime. Instead, they were often fluid, pragmatic arrangements, forming and dissolving based on opportunity and immediate need. The bond was one of shared risk and shared vulnerability. A common fence was needed for stolen goods, a safe place to hide, or a network of lookouts to avoid detection. The dangers of medieval life, starvation, exposure, disease, and the severe punishments for crime meant that going it alone was often a recipe for swift demise. Thus, the very act of seeking safety and sustenance, of sharing the risks inherent in illicit activity, organically led to the formation of these nascent criminal groups. The quiet conversations in dimly lit taverns, the hushed agreements in dark alleys, the subtle nods of recognition among those who shared a common, forbidden purpose. These were the subtle, often unseen ways in which the seeds of the underworld were sown, a testament to the enduring human drive for belonging and survival, even when that belonging led to a life lived in defiance of established order. As the shadowy networks of medieval urban crime began to coalesce, they drew their members from various corners of society. Individuals often marginalized, desperate, or simply possessing skills that found no legitimate outlet. These were the faces in the shadows, united by circumstance and a shared willingness to operate outside the law. Among the most common figures to populate these nascent criminal groups were the vagrants and beggars. Imagine these individuals constantly moving, often without a fixed home or recognized place in the rigid social hierarchy of the medieval town. They existed at the fringes of society, their lives a continuous struggle for mere subsistence, their presence often viewed with a mixture of pity, suspicion, and disdain by the more settled populace. For these individuals, begging was often a last resort, a desperate plea for charity. However, the sheer competition for alms in crowded urban centers could be fierce, leading to a need for more organized approaches. Vagrants and beggars might form loose associations, informal groups bound by mutual need and shared risk. These associations could serve multiple purposes. They might establish unspoken territories for begging, avoiding direct competition, and ensuring a consistent, if meager, flow of charity. They might pool their collected alms or scavenged food, sharing resources to ensure collective survival. But beyond this basic communal support, these groups could also become conduits for petty crime. Imagine a group of beggars distracting a merchant while another swiftly lifts a loaf of bread, or a vagrant using their seemingly innocent presence to scope out unguarded goods for a later theft. Their very marginalization, their constant movement, and their lack of fixed addresses made them difficult to track or prosecute by the limited medieval authorities. They understood the hidden nooks and crannies of the town, the blind spots of the watchmen, and the vulnerabilities of the established order. Their desperation, combined with their collective knowledge of the urban underbelly, made them prime candidates for engagement in small-scale, opportunistic illicit activities, a quiet and persistent hum of criminality beneath the surface of daily life. The shuffling of their feet on the cobblestones, the whispered pleas for alms, often masked a sharp, observant mind, constantly evaluating opportunities for survival beyond mere charity. Another source of individuals drawn into illicit activities were those with privileged access to the inner workings of a household or workshop, the disgruntled servants and apprentices. Imagine a household servant, perhaps a scullery maid in a wealthy merchant's home, or a stable boy in a noble's manor. Their daily lives immersed them in the routines and secrets of their masters. They knew where valuables were kept, when the family was away, which doors were left unbarred, or where the pantry was stocked. Similarly, an apprentice, enduring years of harsh discipline and meagre pay, might develop resentment towards their master, coupled with an intimate knowledge of the workshop's layout, its tools, and the products being created. For individuals facing perceived injustice, a lack of advancement, or simply driven by a desire for better fortune, this insider knowledge presented a tempting opportunity. They might betray their masters for gain, either by directly stealing valuables themselves, or, more commonly, by providing crucial information to external criminals. Imagine a servant subtly leaving a window unlatched for an accomplice, or an apprentice discreetly copying a master's design to sell to a rival. The motivation could range from simple theft of small, portable goods, a piece of silver, a fine linen shirt, a valuable tool, to more elaborate schemes involving larger hauls. These were often opportunistic acts, driven by personal grievance or immediate need, rather than loyalty to a larger criminal enterprise. However, their intimate knowledge of the target, their ability to move within the legitimate world unnoticed, made them incredibly valuable to those operating in the shadows. The quiet resentment simmering beneath a servant's obedient facade, the subtle flicker of a glance towards a locked chest, were the silent signals of potential betrayal, transforming trusted access into a dangerous vulnerability for their unsuspecting masters. A more overtly dangerous and often skilled element within medieval criminal networks came from the ranks of ex-soldiers and mercenaries. Imagine a grizzled veteran, perhaps a former longbowman or pikeman, returning from a brutal campaign. His skills, honed in the crucible of battle, combat, stealth, the ability to operate in hostile environments, were suddenly rendered redundant in times of peace. Without the discipline of military command or the steady pay of a lord, these individuals, often hardened by violence and accustomed to a life of plunder, found it difficult to reintegrate into civilian society. Their options for legitimate employment might be scarce, and the transition from a life of martial prowess to one of quiet domesticity often proved impossible. Driven by necessity, by a desire to maintain their accustomed lifestyle, or simply by the lingering habits of violence, these former fighters might readily use their skills for illicit purposes. Imagine a group of ex-mercenaries, their faces scarred, their movements precise, forming a small, tightly knit band dedicated to robbery. They would be adept at ambushes, at scaling walls, at intimidating victims. Their knowledge of weapons, tactics, and brute force made them a significant threat, capable of executing more daring and violent crimes than petty thieves. They might target travelers on the lonely roads outside the town gates, or even attempt to raid the warehouses of wealthy merchants. Their organizational structure, however loose, often derived from their military training, giving them a cohesion and effectiveness rarely seen in other criminal groups. The quiet, disciplined movements through the night, the glint of steel in the darkness, the sudden, brutal efficiency of their actions. These were the chilling hallmarks of ex-soldiers turning their martial prowess against the very society they were once paid to protect, transforming the brutal necessities of war into the illicit opportunities of peace. Beyond those tied to specific roles or backgrounds, medieval towns harbored numerous masterless men and women. Imagine individuals who had no clear lord, no guild affiliation, no established family to whom they owed fealty or who in turn offered them protection. They were, in essence, without a recognized place in the rigid, hierarchical structure of medieval society. This lack of formal attachment often made them a source of suspicion. Why did they not have a master? What were they hiding? Their very independence, a perceived anomaly in a world built on dependency and fealty, made them inherently suspect in the eyes of authority. These masterless individuals, often living on the margins, found that their lack of traditional belonging could be both a curse and a quiet form of liberation. While it meant vulnerability, it also meant freedom from the constraints and expectations of established norms. They would often find solidarity in illicit groups, drawn together by a shared sense of otherness and a mutual need for support that the formal structures of society denied them. These groups were not necessarily criminal in origin, but their very existence outside the regulated order could lead them towards illicit activities. They might become carriers of contraband, lookouts for smugglers, or providers of safe houses for those fleeing justice. Their lack of formal ties made them adept at navigating the hidden pathways of the urban underworld, unnoticed by the very authorities who sought to categorize and control every individual. The quiet conversations in back alleys, the knowing glances shared between strangers, the subtle ways in which they moved through the legitimate world without truly being a part of it. These were the hallmarks of the masterless, transforming their societal alienation into a quiet, pervasive presence within the urban shadows. It is important to understand that the criminal associations of the medieval period were not, for the most part, the highly structured, long-standing, and hierarchically organized syndicates we might associate with modern mafia families or global cartels. Rather, they were predominantly opportunistic groups, often fluid in their membership and their activities. Imagine a group forming for a specific purpose: a quick robbery of a wealthy merchant's warehouse, a smuggling run past the town customs. Once the deed was done, the group might dissolve, its members scattering to pursue other ventures, or simply to lay low. Their structure was loose, based on immediate need and individual capabilities, rather than on a complex command chain. The primary binding agent was opportunity and shared risk. Individuals would gravitate towards groups where a particular skill or connection was needed, and where the potential for gain outweighed the substantial dangers of detection and punishment. A skilled lockpicker might work with a former soldier for a burglary. A dispossessed serf might team up with a vagrant to pickpocket unsuspecting pilgrims. These were ad hoc arrangements, driven by the fluctuating tides of opportunity and necessity. While some leaders might emerge through charisma or skill, their authority was often informal and temporary. There was no overarching crime boss controlling vast territories or diverse illicit enterprises in the way we understand it today. The medieval underworld was a patchwork of shifting alliances, a constant ebb and flow of individuals coming together for a brief, illicit purpose, before dispersing again into the shadows. The quiet rustle of their movements through the night, the fleeting glances of recognition between those who shared a forbidden knowledge, were the subtle markers of these fluid, ever-changing associations, a testament to the raw, opportunistic nature of crime in an unpoliced world. Within the shadowy underbelly of medieval European towns, where necessity often outweighed legality, a range of illicit activities took root and quietly flourished. These were the common crimes and schemes that characterized the medieval urban underworld, driven by a combination of desperation, opportunity, and the very real chance of evading the rudimentary arms of justice. Among the most pervasive and frequent of these transgressions was petty theft and burglary. Imagine, if you will, the constant struggle for basic necessities, food, clothing, tools, or small valuables, by those living on the margins of society. For individuals facing the gnawing pang of hunger, or the biting chill of a medieval winter, the temptation to take what was needed from others became overwhelming. Petty theft could take many forms, often opportunistic in nature. A quick hand might snatch a loaf of bread from an unattended market stall, a piece of fruit from a vendor's cart, or a discarded tool left by a careless artisan. Children, driven by hunger, were particularly adept at such acts, their small size and seeming innocence often allowing them to escape immediate notice. Imagine a quiet market square at dusk, as merchants pack away their wares, and a small, quick hand slips into a basket, disappearing with a few apples or a length of simple cloth. These acts, though small, were vital for the immediate survival of the impoverished. Beyond these fleeting opportunities, burglary represented a more deliberate, often nocturnal form of theft. Under the profound cover of night, with its deep, impenetrable darkness and the near absence of watchful eyes, homes and workshops became vulnerable. Imagine a dimly lit street, the houses shuttered and barred, as figures move silently through the shadows. They might attempt to pry open a weak door, to force a flimsy window, or to climb into an unguarded loft. Their targets were not necessarily grand treasures, but rather the essential items of daily life: a store of grain, a warm woolen cloak, a few valuable tools left unattended, or a small purse of coins hidden beneath a floorboard. The risk was immense, for discovery could lead to brutal punishment, but the reward, a temporary reprieve from hunger or cold, often justified the peril. The quiet creak of a window hinge, the soft scrape of a tool against wood, the hushed whispers of accomplices. These were the sounds of desperate individuals seeking to bridge the gap between their dire need and the resources of the unsuspecting, under the profound and forgiving cloak of medieval night. Beyond the immediate, personal acts of theft, more sophisticated networks engaged in the clandestine movement of goods, giving rise to smuggling and black markets. Imagine the rigid economic controls of medieval towns, guilds regulating trades, lords levying tolls, and monarchs imposing customs duties on goods entering or leaving their territories. These regulations, while designed to generate revenue and protect local industries, also created opportunities for illicit profit. Smuggling involved the secret transportation of valuable commodities, perhaps fine wines from distant vineyards, exotic spices from the East, luxurious silks, or untaxed wool, to avoid these duties and sell them on the informal black markets for a higher profit. This was not a simple act of individual opportunism. It often involved established routes and contacts. Imagine hushed meetings in dimly lit taverns, whispered agreements between a merchant looking to cut costs and a network of transporters willing to take the risk. Goods might be hidden in false bottoms of carts, ferried across rivers under the cloak of night, or carried through unguarded paths in the dense forests surrounding a town. The process required a certain level of organization, individuals responsible for acquiring the goods, others for transporting them, and still others for distributing them through informal channels within the town, bypassing official marketplaces. The black markets themselves were not physical locations in the modern sense, but rather a network of individuals who knew where to find untaxed or forbidden goods. They operated through word of mouth, often from the back rooms of less reputable inns or through specific contacts known only to a trusted few. The pervasive scent of damp earth and stale ale in the shadows, the quiet clink of illicit coins changing hands, the low murmur of secret negotiations. These were the sensory hallmarks of a thriving illicit trade that constantly undermined the official economy, a shadowy parallel world of commerce operating just beyond the reach of the law. Amidst the structured commerce of the day, medieval towns also possessed numerous establishments that catered to the less regulated aspects of human nature, leading to tavern brawls and gambling dens. Imagine the dimly lit interior of a medieval tavern, thick with the scent of stale ale, sweat, and cheap tobacco. Here, labourers, travellers, and soldiers would gather, seeking respite from the day's toil, consuming copious amounts of strong, often unfiltered beer or wine. The atmosphere, initially jovial, could quickly turn volatile, fueled by drink, grievances, and the simmering frustrations of daily life. Tavern brawls, often spontaneous and brutal, were a common occurrence. A careless word, a perceived insult, or a disagreement over a game could erupt into a violent melee involving fists, tankards, and even knives. These were less about organized crime and more about the raw, unbridled aggression of individuals operating under the influence of alcohol, but the resulting chaos often created opportunities for opportunistic thieves to pick pockets amidst the confusion. Beyond the public space of the tavern, tucked away in back rooms or hidden cellars, existed illicit gambling dens. These were places where men, and sometimes women, would gather to wager their meager earnings or even their valuable possessions on games of chance, dice, cards, or other medieval pastimes. These dens were often unregulated, and the stakes could be high, attracting not only desperate individuals, but also those looking to exploit them. Cheating was rife, disputes were common, and the outcomes were often rigged by professional gamblers or the owners of the dens. Imagine the tense silence broken by the clatter of dice, the sudden exclamations of despair or triumph, the low, angry murmurs of those who felt cheated. While not strictly organized crime in the sense of a syndicate, these establishments and activities created environments ripe for opportunistic crime, for disputes escalating into violence, and for the systematic fleecing of the vulnerable. The clink of coins, the slosh of spilled ale, the sharp crack of a fist connecting with flesh. These were the chaotic sounds of a hidden world, where fortune was sought and lost, and where passions often spilled into uncontrolled violence. In the darker corners of medieval towns, a particularly vulnerable segment of the population was exploited through prostitution rings. While prostitution existed openly in many medieval towns, often relegated to specific districts or licensed by local authorities, there was also a clandestine, organized element that profited from the exploitation of individuals. Imagine the narrow, dimly lit alleyways of a designated red light district, where the faint glow of a lamp might mark a hidden doorway. Or, more insidiously, imagine the hidden corners of a bustling market, or the back rooms of disreputable taverns, where young women, often driven by extreme poverty or coercion, were forced into sexual servitude. These were often controlled by individuals, sometimes known as madams or pimps, who managed a stable of women, taking the lion's share of their earnings and often controlling their lives through debt, intimidation, or outright violence. These organized exploitation networks were less about streetwalkers operating independently and more about a system designed to profit from the desperation of others. They might target orphaned girls, runaway servants, or women abandoned by their families, offering them a deceptive promise of shelter or food, only to trap them in a cycle of forced prostitution. The vulnerability of these individuals, coupled with the societal shame associated with their plight, made it incredibly difficult for them to seek help or escape their circumstances. The sounds associated with these activities would be hushed conversations, the furtive rustle of cloaks, the muffled cries in the night, and the silent footsteps of desperation. This illicit trade, though often hidden, cast a pervasive shadow over the lives of countless women, a stark reminder of the exploitation that thrived in the unpoliced corners of medieval urban life, preying on the most vulnerable and leaving behind a trail of silent suffering. Finally, while not as sophisticated or systematic as later eras of organized crime, there were nascent forms of protection rackets beginning to emerge in medieval towns. Imagine a small artisan, perhaps a shoemaker or a tailor, struggling to make a living in a bustling but competitive street. Suddenly, he might be approached by a group of intimidating individuals, perhaps ex-soldiers or strong-armed thugs, offering him protection. This protection was, in essence, a thinly veiled demand for payment in exchange for immunity from harm, either from their own group or from other unspecified trouble. This was a primitive form of extortion, a quiet threat masked as an offer of security. The payments might be small, a few coins a week, or a share of the artisan's meager profits. But the alternative was often clear: unexplained damage to property, disruption of business, or even physical harm. These nascent rackets typically operated on a very local scale, targeting specific streets or a cluster of shops. They were less about controlling vast territories and more about exploiting the immediate vulnerabilities of small merchants and artisans who lacked powerful patrons or effective legal recourse. The threat was often conveyed through veiled warnings, a knowing look, or the sudden, inexplicable breakage of a window. The silence that followed such an offer would be thick with unspoken menace, forcing the victim into a difficult choice: pay the tribute and endure the quiet resentment, or resist and risk the very real consequences. This early form of organized coercion, while lacking the grand scale of later criminal enterprises, represented a persistent, if localized, threat to the peace and security of ordinary townspeople, a quiet demonstration of power exerted by those who chose to live by intimidation rather than honest toil. In the shadowy world of medieval urban crime, the illicit networks operated under the persistent, if often limited, threat of detection and punishment. Medieval authorities, lacking the sophisticated tools of modern law enforcement, relied on a mix of rudimentary systems and communal responsibility to combat these pervasive, yet often elusive, criminal elements. At the forefront of this effort were the watchmen and bellmen, their presence a constant, albeit often ineffective, feature of the medieval night. Imagine a solitary figure, perhaps a local citizen taking his turn on night duty, or a paid, albeit poorly compensated, guard. He would patrol a specific quarter of the town, his footsteps echoing on the cobblestones in the profound darkness. His primary tools were a dim lantern, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance and distort around him, and a simple staff, perhaps more for support than for defense. His presence was more symbolic than truly deterrent. He would call out the hours, his voice echoing through the quiet streets, a rhythmic assurance of order that often belied the true state of affairs. "All's well," he might cry, even as illicit activities unfolded just beyond the reach of his lantern's feeble glow. These watchmen were limited in their effectiveness by their sparse numbers, the vastness of the unlit urban landscape, and their often inadequate training or personal courage. They were not a professional police force, but rather a sporadic presence, easily evaded by those who knew the labyrinthine alleys and hidden passages of the town. Criminals could simply melt into the deeper shadows, patiently waiting for the watchman to pass before resuming their illicit activities. The distant ring of the bellman's bell, the echo of his call through the sleeping town, was a familiar sound, a comfort to the law-abiding, but often a mere signal to the criminal that the brief, easily avoided moment of official presence was passing, leaving them to their uninterrupted endeavors. This quiet, almost ritualistic, patrolling rarely truly interrupted the determined clandestine movements that flourished under the cloak of deepest night. Beyond the sporadic presence of watchmen, the primary mechanism for law enforcement in medieval society rested on citizens' arrest and the hue and cry. Imagine a merchant discovering his shop has been burgled, or a traveller being robbed on a street. His immediate reaction would be to raise a loud, sustained alarm, the hue and cry. This was a communal expectation. Upon hearing the alarm, all able-bodied citizens were legally obligated to join in the pursuit of the suspected criminal. Picture the sudden cacophony as cries of "Stop thief" or "Murder" would pierce the quiet night, rousing households, sending people scrambling from their beds, seizing whatever makeshift weapons were at hand. Torches would be lit, lanterns swung, as a chaotic, spontaneous pursuit unfolded through the narrow streets. This system, while demonstrating the powerful concept of communal responsibility, was often more effective in theory than in practice, particularly in larger, more anonymous urban centres. In a small village where everyone knew everyone else, a criminal would have nowhere to hide. But in the sprawling, often confusing layout of a medieval town, a thief could easily disappear into the maze of alleys, melting into the shadows, or finding refuge among the transient populations. The pursuit could quickly lose momentum, dissolve into confusion, or simply lead to mistaken identity in the darkness. Furthermore, a natural reluctance might exist for individuals to put themselves in harm's way for a stranger's loss. While the legal obligation was clear, the practical risks were significant. Thus, while the hue and cry could sometimes lead to swift justice, its overall effectiveness in containing widespread crime or dismantling organized networks was limited by its reliance on spontaneous, uncoordinated citizen action. The desperate cries echoing through the night were often met with cautious silence, a testament to the risks inherent in intervening in an unpoliced world. When criminals were apprehended, whether through a successful hue and cry or through more direct action by town authorities, they faced local courts and harsh punishments. Imagine the grim, often public spectacle of medieval justice. The legal system was often localized, with town courts handling a wide range of offences, from petty theft to more serious crimes. Due process, as we understand it today, was often rudimentary or non-existent. Confessions might be extracted through torture, and trials could be swift, based heavily on witness testimony, suspicion, and reputation rather than forensic evidence. The penalties for even what we might consider minor infractions were exceptionally severe, designed not only to punish the individual, but also to serve as a brutal deterrent to others. For petty crimes like repeated theft or vagrancy, punishments could include public flogging, leaving permanent scars as a mark of shame and pain. Mutilation, such as the cutting off of an ear or a hand, was also a possibility, permanently branding the offender and hindering their future ability to commit certain crimes. For more serious offences, or for repeat offenders, the ultimate penalty awaited: hanging. Imagine the gallows, often erected in a prominent public space, a stark warning against transgression. Executions were public spectacles, intended to instill fear and reinforce order. the sight of a body swaying from a rope, the silent testament to failed justice, was a common, if gruesome, reminder of the unforgiving nature of medieval law. This severity, however, did not always deter crime, particularly for those driven by desperation. For them, the potential reward of survival often outweighed the terrifying risks of discovery and the brutal consequences of medieval justice. The quiet creak of the gallows, the public cries of suffering, were intended to bring order, but often only underscored the grim realities of a society struggling to contain its own shadow. In a world where official capture was so brutal, criminals sought refuge in various physical or social spaces, notably through sanctuary and hidden places. Imagine a desperate criminal, perhaps a thief pursued by angry citizens or town guards, making a frantic dash towards a nearby church. The concept of church sanctuary was a deeply ingrained legal and religious tradition in medieval Europe. A person accused of a crime could seek refuge within the consecrated grounds of a church or abbey, and for a specific period, often 40 days, they would be immune from arrest. This provided a temporary respite, a chance for the individual to negotiate a pardon, or more commonly, to arrange passage to another jurisdiction, often swearing an oath to leave the realm. While not a permanent escape, it offered a crucial breathing space, a moment of legal immunity in a world otherwise unforgiving. Beyond the official protection of the church, the very architecture of medieval towns offered countless informal hiding places. Imagine the dense, labyrinthine nature of urban alleys, narrow, twisting passages, often unlit and unpaved, forming a bewildering maze where a pursuer could easily become lost. These dark, confusing pathways were known intimately by those who operated outside the law, providing escape routes and temporary havens. Furthermore, the impoverished districts, often crowded with ramshackle dwellings, outbuildings, and improvised shelters, served as vast, difficult-to-penetrate safe zones. Here, amongst a population often wary of authority, a criminal could blend in, find a temporary bed, or receive a warning of impending searches. The smells of refuse and unwashed humanity, the sounds of countless hidden lives, provided a pervasive anonymity. These were places where official authority rarely ventured, or did so with extreme caution, turning these neglected corners of the town into unofficial refuges. The silent knowledge of these hidden routes, the subtle nods of recognition exchanged in dark doorways, were vital survival tools for those constantly living on the run, transforming the very urban fabric into a landscape of evasion. The efforts of medieval authorities to investigate and prosecute crime were further hampered by the fundamental difficulty of investigation. Imagine a crime scene without forensics, no fingerprint analysis, no DNA evidence, no ballistics. Identifying and proving the guilt of a criminal was an arduous, often insurmountable task. Law enforcement relied almost entirely on direct witness testimony, which could be unreliable, prejudiced, or simply unavailable in the darkness of night. Without modern scientific tools, linking a suspect to a crime often came down to circumstantial evidence, a confession, often coerced, or the simple reputation of the accused. Furthermore, there was a profound lack of centralized information. Records were fragmented, communication between towns was slow, and there was no system for tracking known criminals across different jurisdictions. A thief who committed a crime in one town could simply move to the next, becoming an unknown face, their past transgressions undiscoverable by the local authorities. There was no concept of a criminal database, no shared intelligence networks. Each crime was a discrete incident, investigated almost from scratch. This meant that identifying patterns of criminal behavior, linking members of a network, or prosecuting individuals beyond their immediate known misdeeds was exceedingly difficult. The quiet frustration of medieval investigators, grappling with shadowy figures and elusive evidence, was a constant backdrop to the struggle against crime. The silent disappearance of a suspect into the teeming crowds, the lack of any tangible trail beyond a few fleeting whispers, ensured that many illicit activities remained shrouded in mystery, defying the rudimentary attempts of medieval justice to bring them fully into the light. As our quiet journey through the hidden corners of medieval urban life draws to its close, it becomes clear that despite the limited documentation and the lack of sophisticated criminal analysis, these illicit networks and activities constituted a constant, underlying reality of the era. The medieval chroniclers and official records primarily focused on the grand narratives of kings, battles, and religious events, rarely delved into the minutiae of everyday crime with the detail we might wish for. Yet the scattered references in court documents, guild regulations, and personal letters paint a consistent picture that even if these groups were not organized in the modern sense of a rigid, hierarchical syndicate with overarching control, they represented a continuous threat to property and safety within the bustling confines of the town walls. Imagine the subtle shift in atmosphere as dusk approached, the nervous glances towards dark alleys, the quickening pace of footsteps after the curfew bell. This pervasive unease, this constant low hum of potential danger, was a palpable presence, shaping the daily lives and collective consciousness of medieval townspeople. It was not the dramatic, overt violence of open warfare, but a more insidious, unseen menace that constantly gnawed at the edges of their security. The simple act of leaving one's home after dark, or the careful counting of one's coin purse in the market, was infused with a quiet vigilance. This persistent threat meant that while life might continue with its daily rhythm, a part of the mind was always aware of the shadows, of the possibility that unseen hands might reach out from the gloom. It was a societal backdrop of quiet apprehension, a subtle erosion of peace that influenced countless small decisions, from the strength of a door's lock to the routes one chose to walk after the sun had set. The very air seemed to hold this tension, a constant unspoken reminder that beneath the veneer of order, a different set of rules often applied, enforced by those who thrived in the clandestine spaces of the urban night. The presence of this persistent, shadowy underworld inevitably had a profound impact on daily life for the ordinary citizens of medieval towns. Imagine, if you will, the collective consciousness of a community constantly aware of the risk of theft, burglary, or even personal assault. This awareness directly influenced fears and anxieties. Children might be warned sternly about wandering too far after dark. Merchants might employ guards or secure their goods more rigorously. The general atmosphere would be one of caution, a quiet vigilance that permeated homes and streets once the sun had set. The need for locked doors and barred windows became not just a practical measure against the elements, but a fundamental act of defense against human intrusion. Imagine the nightly ritual, the heavy wooden door swinging shut, the clatter of the iron bar sliding into place, the quiet click of a stout lock. These simple acts were imbued with a powerful significance, providing a psychological barrier against the unseen dangers lurking outside. Beyond the physical defenses, there was a collective desire for order that these illicit activities constantly challenged. The town guilds, the local magistrates, and the church all sought to impose and maintain a sense of structured, lawful existence. The very concept of communal responsibility, as seen in the hue and cry, underscored this desire for self-policing and a collective stand against chaos. When crimes occurred, they disrupted this cherished order, eroding trust and fostering suspicion. The stories of successful thefts, of unexplained disappearances, or of daring acts of smuggling would circulate quietly, reinforcing the perception of a world where vigilance was paramount. This constant, underlying pressure from the criminal element created a quiet tension that influenced social interactions, economic practices, and the very architecture of security, making medieval urban life a subtle dance between the open light of daily commerce and the pervasive, encroaching darkness of illicit enterprise. One of the most compelling yet frustrating aspects of studying medieval crime is encountering the unwritten stories. Imagine the vast majority of these illicit activities, the countless minor thefts, the brief, fluid alliances, the desperate acts of survival that simply went unrecorded by history. The official documents, court records, guild minutes, royal decrees, only captured a fraction of the criminal underworld, primarily focusing on cases that resulted in arrest, trial, and punishment, or those that involved significant property or prominent individuals. The vast tapestry of day-to-day petty crime, the minor deceptions, the quiet acts of desperation, the fleeting encounters in dark alleys. These were the lives and actions that simply faded into the mists of time, leaving no tangible trace for future generations. The individuals involved were often illiterate, leaving no personal memoirs or confessional letters. Their lives were lived on the margins, outside the formal structures that produced records. Their stories are not told in chronicles or legal treatises, but exist only as quiet whispers in the collective memory, or as faint, almost imperceptible echoes in the physical landscape of old towns. A worn stone in an alley, a particularly strong door on a medieval house. This makes the true scope and nature of medieval organized crime difficult to fully grasp, for we are only seeing a small, flickering portion of a much larger, darker canvas. We can infer, we can surmise, but the specific narratives of these hidden lives and their illicit activities remain largely unrecorded by history, a testament to the fact that much of the human experience, particularly that lived in the shadows, has been lost to the relentless march of time. Their lives were a silent ballet of survival, leaving behind only the faintest impressions for us to ponder, a stark reminder of the limitations of our historical lens. Ultimately, the presence of these criminal elements was not an anomaly, but an inherent part of the fabric of medieval urban life. Just as the towering cathedrals spoke of faith and the bustling markets hummed with trade, so too did the persistent, shadowy world of crime operate silently beneath the surface, a constant, if often unseen, counterpoint to the established order. Imagine the medieval town as a complex organism, with its overt functions of governance, commerce, and spiritual life. But within its very body, in its forgotten corners and unlit passages, existed a parasitic, yet often symbiotic element of illicit activity. It was a consequence of the rapid growth of urban centres, the vast disparities in wealth, the limitations of medieval law enforcement, and the simple, enduring human drives for survival and gain. This criminal substratum was not a fleeting phenomenon. It was a deeply embedded aspect of the urban environment, adapting to the changing social and economic conditions. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the imperfections of society, a testament to the fact that where there are rules, there will always be those who seek to bend or break them. The rhythmic sounds of honest labor in the daytime gave way to the hushed movements of illicit enterprise at night. The light of civic order was constantly challenged by the encroaching darkness of individual transgression and nascent networks of wrongdoing. Thus, we can conclude that just as trade and religion shaped medieval towns, creating their unique character and purpose, so too did the persistent, shadowy world of crime, operating silently under the night's grasp, influence the very texture of daily existence, a quiet yet powerful force that truly shaped the hidden life of the medieval city. And now, as the quiet echoes of medieval nightfall begin to recede, we draw our contemplative journey to a close. We have walked softly through the unlit alleys and hidden corners of medieval European towns, peering into a world where organized crime, though different from our modern understanding, was a pervasive and enduring presence. Allow the images of the dimly lit streets, the vigilant watchmen, and the shadowy figures of the urban underworld to gently fade. Consider, for a moment, the immense contrast with our own brightly lit, extensively policed cities. This quiet reflection is not meant to alarm, but to foster a deeper appreciation for the evolution of social order, the complexities of human behavior, and the profound comfort of our present peace. As the stories of medieval crimes settle into silence, allow your own breath to deepen, your muscles to relax. The world outside is quiet now. The challenging realities of the past, with their enduring shadows, have offered their gentle insights. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be, but here, in this moment of stillness. Let the final threads of history unravel, leaving you with a sense of peace and a quiet understanding. Drift now, if you wish, into the soft embrace of sleep. The journey is complete. Rest deeply.